I never intended to start a war inside that glass-walled boardroom, but the moment the light hit the emerald on his right hand, I knew I could not stay quiet. I looked the billionaire in the eye and said, "Excuse me, sir, that is my father's ring." He turned ghost white. It was the look of a man realizing a 30-year-old secret had just walked through the door. My name is Everly Fisher, and for 29 years, I had trained myself to be the most forgettable person in the room. In the world of high-stakes corporate risk management, being invisible was a superpower. If people looked at you, they stopped looking at the numbers. And the numbers were the only things in this world that never lied to me. But as I stood at the head of the mahogany conference table on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower in Philadelphia, I knew my invisibility was about to expire. The room smelled of chemically cooled air, expensive leather, and the specific, metallic scent of ruthless ambition. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass, the city of Philadelphia stretched out in a gray grid, oblivious to the fact that I was about to faint. I checked my tablet. The battery was at 98%. My pulse was considerably higher. This was not just any meeting. This was the quarterly risk assessment for the Hargrove Meridian Group, a conglomerate that owned half the logistics hubs on the East Coast and enough real estate to house the population of a small country. I was a junior analyst, a nobody who had been pulled off the bench because the senior director had come down with a convenient case of food poisoning. I suspected he was actually terrified of the man who had just walked through the double glass doors. Graham Hargrove did not walk so much as he cut through the space. He was a man made of sharp angles and bespoke tailoring, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with the kind of precision money usually could not buy. He was the CEO, a billionaire whose silence was rumored to be more terrifying than his shouting. He did not look at the board members who scrambled to straighten their ties. He went straight to the chair at the head of the table, sat down, and placed his hands on the polished wood. "Begin," he said. One word, no pleasantries. I took a breath that I hoped was audible only to me. I tapped the screen to project the first slide. "Good morning," I said, my voice surprising me with its steadiness. "I am here to discuss the liquidity risks associated with the proposed port acquisition in New Jersey. If you look at the projection on the screen, you will see a variance of 12% in the operational overhead." I was doing it. I was actually doing it. The data flowed out of me like a second language. I walked them through the supply chain vulnerabilities, pointing out where a union strike in Delaware could cost the company $4 million a week. I felt a rhythm taking over, the comforting logic of cause and effect. And then Graham Hargrove moved his hand. It was a small gesture. He simply reached for the crystal water glass in front of him. The movement caught the harsh overhead recessed lighting, and a flash of green fire erupted from his right hand. I froze. It was a split second, a hesitation so brief that perhaps only a sniper would have noticed. But inside my chest, the world ended. He was wearing a gold ring with a large, square-cut emerald. It was an ostentatious piece of jewelry, something that felt at odds with his austere, modern appearance. But it was not the size of the stone that stopped my heart. It was the flaw. Right across the face of the emerald, near the bottom left corner, there was a scratch. It was not a straight line. It was curved, a perfect, jagged crescent shape. My vision tunneled. The boardroom dissolved. I was 9 years old again in Cleveland. I was sitting on a worn carpet, watching a man's large, warm hands turn the pages of a leather-bound book. I could smell old paper and pipe tobacco. I could see the ring on his finger as he pointed to a picture of a knight. I could hear his voice, deep and rumbling against my ear. "See that mark? Evie. That is the moon. It means even when things are dark, we carry our own light." I had traced that crescent scratch with my fingernail 1,000 times. I knew the texture of it better than I knew my own face. It was the ring my father never took off, the ring he was wearing the night he walked out the door and vanished into the ether, leaving nothing behind but questions that festered like open wounds. "Miss Fisher," the voice snapped me back. It was not Graham. It was the CFO, a woman with glasses that looked like they were made of ice. She was staring at me. "You were discussing the liability insurance cap." I blinked. My mouth felt like it was filled with sand. I looked at Graham Hargrove. He was watching me. His eyes were a pale, predatory blue, and he was perfectly still. His hand, the hand with the ring, was resting on the table, the emerald staring at me like a green eye. "Yes," I said. I forced my spine to straighten. "Yes, the liability cap. I had to finish. I had to get through this. If I collapsed now, if I screamed, I would be escorted out by security and I would never get close to that ring again. I needed to be smart. I needed to be the person my mother had forced me to become after my father left the survivor who used logic as a shield. The current policy limits us to $50 million in damages," I continued. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears, detached, as if a radio were playing in the corner. However, based on the environmental audit of the site, the potential cleanup costs for the chemical runoff could exceed $80 million within the first 18 months. I was pointing at the charts. I was citing federal regulations. I was speaking about risk retention groups and captive insurance models, but my eyes kept betraying me. Every time I finished a sentence, my gaze dragged itself back to that hand. Why did he have it? Graham Hargrove was a billionaire from a dynasty that went back 4 generations. My father was a man who fixed clocks and read history books in a small house in Ohio. There was no universe where these two men intersected, and yet, there was the ring. The scratch was undeniable. It was distinct. It was impossible to replicate. I felt a cold sweat breaking out under my blouse. My mind began to race, spinning wild theories. Did my father sell it? Did he steal it? Was it stolen from him? Was he dead? I recommend we pause the acquisition until the environmental impact study is peer-reviewed. I concluded. The exposure is simply too high for the current fiscal quarter. I tapped the screen to black. The room was silent. I stood there, clutching my tablet so hard I thought the glass might snap. I waited for the criticism. I waited for Graham Hargrove to tear my analysis apart. Graham leaned back in his leather chair. He did not look at the other board members. He looked only at me. He raised his right hand to his chin, rubbing his jawline with his thumb. The emerald flashed again. It felt like a taunt. "We will table the New Jersey deal," Graham said. His voice was a low baritone that carried without effort. The CFO looked surprised. "Graham, the penalties for delay are less than $80 million. Graham cut her off. He stood up. "Meeting adjourned." The tension in the room broke like a fever. Chairs scraped against the floor. Executives gathered their papers, whispering to each other, checking their watches, already mentally moving on to their lunch reservations at the Union League. They filed out, ignoring me now that I had served my purpose. I was just the projector, just the voice that read the numbers. I began to unplug my laptop. My hands were shaking so badly I could not fit the cord into the bag. I told myself to leave. Get out. Evie, go home. Research him. Find the connection. Don't do anything stupid. Miss Fisher. I stopped. The room was empty now, except for the two of us. Graham Hargrove had not left. He was standing at the head of the table, buttoning his suit jacket. He was not looking at his phone or his notes. He was waiting. I turned slowly. "Yes, Mr. Hargrove." He walked around the table, moving toward me. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He smelled of sandalwood and something crisp, like expensive gin. He stopped 3 feet away from me. It was too close. "You have an eye for detail," he said. It sounded like a compliment, but his eyes were searching my face, scanning my features as if looking for a flaw in a diamond. "Most analysts gloss over the soil toxicity reports. You dug deep." "I believe in being thorough, sir," I said. "Thorough," he repeated. "Yes, you were nervous. Though, towards the end." He noticed. Of course he noticed. He was a predator. He sensed a change in heart rate from across the room. "I am not used to presenting to the full board," I lied. "I don't think that was it," Graham said softly. He crossed his arms. The hand was there, right there, within grabbing distance. "You were doing fine until minute 12. Then you saw something, or remembered something. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. This was the moment. I could walk away. I could say thank you, sir, and leave. I could keep my job. I could investigate in the shadows. But I looked at the ring again. The crescent moon scratch seemed to glow. Don't trust anything that won't stand up and claim its name. My father had told me, if I walked out now, I would be betraying the 9-year-old girl who sat by the window for 3 years waiting for a car that never came back. I looked up at Graham Hargrove. I locked eyes with him. "Excuse me, sir," I said. My voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "That is my father's ring." The reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. The color drained from Graham Hargrove's face so fast it looked like a physical blow. The arrogant, bored billionaire vanished. In his place stood a man who looked like he had seen a ghost. His right hand flew up, covering the ring with his left palm. It was a reflex. It was the movement of a child hiding a stolen toy, or a criminal hiding a weapon. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated guilt. The silence that stretched between us was louder than the city outside. His chest rose and fell rapidly. He stared at me, his pupils dilating. He looked at my hair, my chin, the shape of my eyes. He was not looking at an employee anymore. He was trying to solve a puzzle that terrified him. "What did you say?" he whispered. "The ring," I said, pointing to his covered hand. "The emerald. It has a crescent-shaped scratch on the lower left corner. My father used to tell me it was the moon." Graham took a step back. He actually stumbled slightly, his heel catching on the thick carpet. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table for support. His knuckles were white. "Who are you?" he demanded. His voice was hoarse, stripped of all its corporate polish. "What is your full name?" "Everly," I said. "Everly Fisher." He stopped breathing. It was not a figure of speech. I watched his chest stop moving. He stood there, frozen, as if the name itself was a spell that had turned him to stone. The air conditioning hummed. Indifferent to the fact that the atmosphere in the room had just dropped to freezing, he looked at me with a mixture of horror and recognition. It was not the recognition of a friend. It was the recognition of a debt collector coming for a bill that was decades overdue. Slowly, very slowly, he removed his hand from the ring. He looked down at it, then back at me. His face was a mask of gray shock. "Fisher," he repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked me in the eye, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in the eyes of a man who owned half the city. "I think," Graham said, his voice trembling slightly, "that we are walking into something my father tried very hard to bury." The silence in the boardroom was heavy, but the silence of my childhood in Cleveland was heavier. It was a physical weight, like a wet wool blanket draped over a house that was slowly sinking into the ground. When Graham Hargrove looked at me with that terrified recognition, I was not seeing the Philadelphia skyline anymore. I was seeing the chipped paint on the windowsill of a rental on the east side of Cleveland, watching the snow turn to gray slush on the pavement. I was 9 years old when the world taught me that people are not permanent. My father was not a man of grand gestures. He was a man of quiet rhythms. He smelled of dark roast coffee and old newsprint. He had a habit of tapping his fingers against the side of his leg when he was reading. A rhythmic drumming 1, 2, 3, pause. That was the soundtrack of my evenings. He was not rich. We lived in a neighborhood where people kept their heads down and their doors locked. But inside our small living room, he built a kingdom of books. He read history, philosophy, and biographies of men who built empires. He told me that the world was a puzzle, and that if you looked hard enough, you could find the corners and work your way in. But the centerpiece of his existence, at least to my 9-year-old eyes, was that ring. He wore it on his right hand. It was heavy gold, old and soft, with that square-cut emerald that seemed to hold a forest inside it. I used to sit on his lap and twist it around his finger. It was loose on him, as if it had been made for a man with thicker hands. That was when I found the scratch, the crescent moon. It was sharp against the smooth surface of the stone. It is a reminder. Evie. He had told me one night, the rain hammering against the roof. This is a family ring. It belongs to people who build things. Don't ever trust something that won't stand up and claim its name. If a man hides his name, he is hiding his soul. I did not understand what he meant then. I thought he was talking about knights or kings in the stories he read. I did not know he was talking about himself. Then came the Tuesday that broke my life in half. There was no shouting. There was no smashing of plates or slamming of doors. I woke up, and the house was simply empty of his sound. The coffee pot was cold. The book he had been reading was closed on the side table, a bookmark tucked halfway through. His coat was gone. His shoes were gone, and he was gone. I sat on the front porch for 6 hours. I watched every car that turned the corner, my heart leaping into my throat, certain that it was him. He just went for milk. I told myself, he went to get the paper. He had to fix a clock for a customer. But the sun went down, and the streetlights flickered on with their sickly orange buzz, and he did not come back. My mother, Evelyn Fisher, changed that night. She had always been soft, a woman who hummed while she cooked and smelled of vanilla, but when the police left 2 days later, after taking a report that clearly showed they did not care about another missing man in a poor zip code, she turned into stone. I asked her where he went. I asked her why he left his book. I asked her about the ring. She looked at me, her eyes dry and hard. There are people who exist like shadows. Everly, she said, we do not chase shadows. We lock the door. She never spoke his name again. It was as if he had been a hallucination we had shared for 9 years. But I knew he was real, because I could still hear the phantom tapping of his fingers. The years that followed were a slow slide into a different kind of darkness. My mother did not just lose a husband. She lost her anchor. She worked double shifts at a diner, coming home with swollen ankles and hands that smelled of grease and bleach. We moved 3 times in 4 years, each apartment smaller than the last. I learned to be invisible. I learned that if I stayed quiet, I would not add to the burden she was carrying. Then the sickness came. It started with a cough that would not go away, then a fatigue that kept her in bed for days. We had no insurance. Doctors were a luxury for other people. I was 14 when I took over the household finances. I learned to juggle utility bills, paying the electric company just enough to keep the lights on, then rotating to the gas bill the next month. I learned that you could water down soup to make it last 2 more meals. I learned that pride was expensive, so I stopped having it. I grew up fast. While other girls were worrying about prom dresses and boys, I was worrying about the eviction notice taped to our front door. My mother faded by inches. In the final months, when the pain was bad, she would talk in her sleep. She mumbled names I did not know. She argued with ghosts. She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength and looked at me with fever-bright eyes. I sent it back. She hissed, I didn't keep their dirty money. I kept you. I did not know who they were. I assumed it was the fever talking. When she died, I was 16. I remember standing in the hospital room, holding a plastic bag with her personal effects, a hairbrush, a worn wallet with $12 inside, a photo of me. That was it. That was the sum total of a life. I entered the foster care system with a chip on my shoulder the size of Ohio. I expected the horror stories I had seen in movies. I expected cruel foster parents and cold attics, but the universe, perhaps feeling it had kicked me enough, gave me a break. I was placed with a family in the suburbs who were tired but kind. My social worker, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, saw something in my grades. She saw that I was good at math. She saw that I used homework as a wall to keep the world out. She did not try to hug me or make me talk about my feelings. She just brought me brochures for scholarships. She told me, "You have a brain that can get you out of here. Everly, use it." So I did. I treated high school like a military operation. I did not make friends. I made grades. I worked 20 hours a week shelving books at the library, saving every penny. But through it all, the memory of the ring remained. It was like a fishbone caught in my throat. I could not swallow it, and I could not cough it up. It was always there, a sharp irritant. I would see a flash of green on a stranger's hand and freeze. I would scour the internet in the library, searching for emerald ring crescent scratch. But the search terms were too vague. I had nothing but a child's memory. People told me to let it go. They told me my father was probably just a deadbeat who ran off with another woman or got into trouble with loan sharks. They said the ring was probably fake glass, costume jewelry that a child had romanticized into treasure. But I knew the weight of that gold. I knew the coldness of that stone. And I knew the look in his eyes when he spoke of it. I chose my career path with the same cold logic I applied to the utility bills. I went into finance and risk management because I wanted to understand how the world worked. I wanted to see the gears. I did not trust words. Words were what my mother used to hide the truth. Words were what the police used to dismiss us. Numbers did not lie. A balance sheet had to balance. If there was a gap, there was a reason. If money moved, it left a trail. I fell in love with the clarity of it. In a spreadsheet, there were no shadows. There were only assets and liabilities. You could calculate the probability of disaster. You could insure against loss. You could control the outcome. I built a life of controlled outcomes. I got a full ride to a state university. I graduated at the top of my class. I moved to Philadelphia because it was far away from the gray ghosts of Cleveland. I bought expensive suits from consignment shops, so I would look like I belonged in the towers of glass and steel. I became Everly Fisher, the analyst, the woman who caught the details everyone else missed, the woman who never talked about her family. But underneath the blazer and the silk blouse, I was still the girl waiting on the porch. I was still angry. It was a cold, hard anger that sat in the pit of my stomach. I was angry at being abandoned. I was angry at my mother's silence. I was angry that I had to fight for every inch of ground while others were born standing on the finish line. And I made a vow to myself, a quiet, dangerous vow. I promised myself that if I ever saw a trace of that life again, if I ever saw a clue, a thread, a hint of the man who walked out on us, I would not be like my mother. I would not hide. I would not be a shadow. I would ask. I would stare the truth in the face and I would demand an answer. I would not care if it destroyed the careful life I had built. I would not care if it hurt. I was tired of imagining. I was tired of the empty space where my history should be. So, when I stood in that boardroom and saw the green flash on Graham Hargrove's hand, I did not think about my career. I did not think about the non-disclosure agreements or the power dynamic or the fact that he could crush me with a phone call. I saw the crescent moon. I saw the answer to 20 years of silence. And the girl from Cleveland, the girl who learned to pay the gas bill with loose change, the girl who held her mother's hand while she died, took over. I was not asking for permission. I was collecting a debt. I think, Graham had said, that we are walking into something my father tried very hard to bury. His words confirmed everything I had felt in my gut for 2 decades. My father had not just left. He had been erased, and looking at the billionaire in front of me, I realized that the eraser was held by the hand wearing my father's ring. Burying things does not mean they are gone. Mr. Hargrove, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my knees. It just means they grow roots in the dark. Graham stared at me. The silence in the room shifted. It was no longer the silence of shock. It was the silence of a battlefield before the first shot is fired. Come with me, he said. It was not a request. He turned and walked toward his private office at the far end of the suite. He did not look back to see if I was following. He knew I would. He knew that I was just as desperate to know the truth as he was afraid of it. I grabbed my tablet, I grabbed my bag, and I walked after him, leaving the safety of the numbers behind, stepping straight into the shadow my mother had warned me about. Getting hired at Hargrove Meridian Group felt less like getting a job and more like being drafted into a very lucrative, high-stakes war. I started 6 months before the boardroom incident, entering the glass tower on Market Street as a junior supply chain risk analyst. My salary was $58,000 a year in Philadelphia. That was enough to rent a studio apartment that did not smell like mildew and buy groceries that were not exclusively pasta. But it was hardly the kind of money that put you in the same orbit as Graham Hargrove. To a man like him, $58,000 was probably a rounding error on a lunch receipt. But for me, it was a lifeline. It was the first time in my life I had health insurance that included dental. It was the first time I had a 401k. It was stability. And stability was the drug I had been chasing since I was 9 years old. The culture at Hargrove Meridian was Darwinian. The office was an open-plan expanse of slate gray and chrome, silent except for the aggressive clatter of keyboards and the hushed, urgent tones of people trying to save their bonuses. "Listen to me. Fisher," Marcus, a senior analyst who had survived 5 years in the trenches, told me during my first week. We were in the break room, which offered free espresso that tasted surprisingly like battery acid. "You are smart. I saw your resume, but smart does not keep you safe here. Usefulness keeps you safe." "I intend to be useful," I said, stirring my coffee. Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice. "And whatever you do, if you ever end up in a room with the CEO, do not try to charm him. Graham Hargrove hates fluff. He hates adjectives. He hates people who try to emotionalize the data. If you ask him for a favor, you are dead. If you waste his time, you are dead. You give him the numbers. You give him the bad news first. And you shut up." "Understood," I said. "He is a machine." "No," Marcus corrected me, looking over his shoulder. "Machines break. Graham just cuts." I kept my head down. I became a creature of spreadsheets and predictive algorithms. I analyzed shipping routes for inefficiencies. I calculated the cost of fuel fluctuations in the South China Sea. I was good at it. I had spent my life preparing for disaster. So predicting it for a logistics company came naturally to me. My breakthrough happened 3 months in. The company was looking to acquire an inland port facility in Pennsylvania, a massive concrete expanse meant to serve as a transfer point for rail freight. The deal was valued at $40 million. Everyone was excited. The senior directors were already mentally spending their commission checks. I was assigned to do the final due diligence on the site's topography. It was grunt work. But as I layered the historical flood maps over the current zoning blueprints, something did not line up. The elevation numbers in the seller's report were consistent, but they contradicted a municipal drainage survey from 1998. Most people would have assumed it was a clerical error. I did not believe in errors. I pulled the satellite imagery. I cross-referenced it with local rainfall data from the last 10 years. I realized that the seller had graded the land to hide a natural depression. If we bought that port, the first heavy spring rain would turn the main loading dock into a swimming pool. The cost to fix it would not be a renovation fee. It would be a total reconstruction. I wrote the report. I titled it simply, "Structural Fluidity Risks and Capital Exposure." My direct manager tried to bury it. He wanted the deal to go through, but I used the internal flagging system to send a copy to the compliance office, a move that made me 0 friends, but saved the company a potential lawsuit and $20 million in repair costs. 2 days later, the acquisition was killed. The next morning, I received an email. It was not from my manager. It was from the executive office. I had been reassigned to the special projects team overseeing the upcoming merger with a European logistics giant. That was how I ended up in the orbit of Graham Hargrove. The merger was codenamed Project Apex. It was a multi-billion-dollar marriage that would make Hargrove Meridian the largest logistics operator in the Western Hemisphere. The war room for Project Apex was on the 40th floor. The air up there was thinner. The carpet was thicker. The people were sharper. But the atmosphere was toxic. As I sat in the back of strategy meetings, taking notes and running probability models, I sensed a fracture in the leadership. There were 2 camps. One camp, led by the aggressive head of sales, wanted to sign the deal immediately before the quarter ended. They were hungry. They pushed for speed. The other camp, mostly the legal team and a few old guard board members, was dragging its feet. They kept citing a compliance hold. There were whispers about a specific clause in the merger agreement, something regarding the restructuring of the family trust that controlled the majority voting shares. "It is the legacy clause," I heard a VP whisper to a lawyer by the water cooler one afternoon. "If we merge, The trust structure changes. Vivian is terrified it will trigger the audit. Graham wants it done, the lawyer replied. He wants the company modernized. He is tired of the old shackles. Graham does not know what is in the basement, the VP said darkly. I noted it all. I did not know who Vivian was at the time, nor what the basement referred to, but I filed it away. Graham Hargrove was a constant presence in these meetings. He was exactly as Marcus had described, cold, efficient, and terrifyingly sharp. He did not speak often, but when he did, he dissected arguments with surgical precision. But there were moments when the dynamic shifted. Sometimes, when the room was arguing over valuation multiples or employee retention pools, I would look up and find Graham watching me. It was not the leering gaze of men who thought a young woman in a skirt was office decor. It was a puzzled, intense scrutiny. He would look at me, then look away, his brow furrowing slightly. It was the look of a man trying to remember a song he had heard 20 years ago. One afternoon, the elevator doors opened, and he stepped in. It was just the two of us. My heart rate spiked to 120. Miss Fisher, he said, not looking at me. The report on the port facility. You bypassed your manager to flag the drainage issue. Yes, sir, I said, clutching my files. The risk threshold required immediate disclosure under Section 4 of the Employee Handbook. He turned to me. We were close. I could see the gray flecks in his blue eyes. Most people value loyalty to their boss over loyalty to the truth. My boss does not sign my paycheck, sir. The company does. And the truth is the only asset that does not depreciate. He stared at me for a long moment. A strange shadow passed over his face. You sound older than your resume suggests. I have had a long life, sir, I said. The elevator dinged. He stepped out without another word, but the interaction left me shaking. It also fueled my obsession. I knew the ring was the key. Since the moment I saw him in the hallway a month prior before the boardroom meeting, just a glimpse I had suspected. Now, being on his floor, I was hunting for confirmation. I spent my nights in my small apartment, my laptop burning my thighs, scouring the internet. I searched Graham Hargrove photos. I watched videos of his speeches at economic forums. I zoomed in on high-resolution images from charity galas. It was maddening. Graham Hargrove was media-shy, but even when he was photographed, he had a subconscious tic. In almost every picture, his right hand was hidden. He would have it in his pocket. He would be holding a folder. He would be shaking hands with someone, but the angle would obscure the ring finger. Or he would simply be standing with his hands clasped behind his back. It was not an accident. A man does not hide a family heirloom unless he is ashamed of it or afraid of it. Why would a billionaire hide a ring unless he knew, on some level, that it did not belong to him, unless he knew it was a stolen thing? The lack of visual evidence made me bold. I needed to know more about the family. I needed to know the history of the Hargroves beyond the Forbes profiles that listed their net worth and their philanthropy. One late night in the office, waiting for a data set to download from the Singapore server, I logged into the company intranet. I had security clearance level 3 now. Thanks to the merger team, it gave me access to historical archives, old board minutes, and legal repositories. I typed in emerald ring, 0 results. I typed in family jewelry, 0 results. I typed in Hargrove assets, thousands of results, mostly real estate. I sat back, rubbing my eyes. The office was dark, save for the green glow of the emergency exit signs. I thought about my father. I thought about the way he tapped his fingers. 1, 2, 3, pause. Don't trust anything that won't stand up and claim its name. I typed in Fisher. Nothing. Then, on a whim, remembering the whispers about the trust structure I had overheard, I typed in Meridian Trust Protocol. The screen flickered. A file appeared in the search list. File name: MT key 4. Secure PDF date created. October 14, 1994. Classification restricted. Board eyes only. My heart hammered. 1994. That was the year my father disappeared. That was the year my life fractured. I moved the cursor over the file. My finger hovered over the mouse. I knew that it tracked every click. I knew that opening a restricted file was grounds for immediate termination. I could lose my job. I could lose the health insurance. I could lose the stability I had fought so hard to build. But I was not Everly the analyst in that moment. I was Everly the daughter. I clicked. A red box exploded onto the screen. Access denied. Security alert triggered. Authorization code required. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath coming in short gasps. I waited for a security guard to burst in. I waited for the phone to ring. Nothing happened. The office remained silent, but I knew I had touched a wire. The file existed. The Meridian Trust Protocol was real. And it was created the same year my father vanished. It was locked away in the deepest part of the company's digital brain, guarded like a nuclear code. I packed my bag with trembling hands. I had to leave. As I walked to the elevator, I realized two things. First, the ring on Graham Hargrove's hand was not just a piece of jewelry. It was the physical key to whatever was locked in that PDF. Second, the merger they were pushing for so aggressively wasn't just about business. It was about burying that file so deep that no one, not even a persistent risk analyst with a ghost in her past, would ever find it. I went home, but I did not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of power. They were hiding something. And if they were hiding it, that meant they were afraid. And if they were afraid, that meant I could win. The next morning was the board meeting. The meeting where I would see the ring up close. The meeting where I would decide to stop searching in the dark and light a match in the middle of the room. The locked PDF file on the server was a digital wall, but I knew from my years in risk assessment that every wall has a physical foundation. If I could not break the encryption, I had to find the source material in the real world. My investigation moved from the glow of my laptop screen to the dust of the company archives. The Hargrove Meridian Group prided itself on history. In the lobby of the tower, there was a glass case displaying the original ledgers from the 1920s. But the real history, the kind they did not put under spotlights, was kept in the corporate library on the 15th floor. It was a room that smelled of furniture polish and neglect, filled with leather-bound annual reports and commemorative photo albums that no one had opened in decades. I spent my lunch hour there the day after I found the locked file. I told the librarian I was looking for historical context for the merger press release. She pointed me to the shelf marked Executive History and went back to her crossword puzzle. I pulled down a heavy volume titled The Hargrove Legacy, 1950 to 1990. It was oversized, glossy, and heavy enough to kill a man. I flipped through the pages, scanning the faces of board members and executives, looking for the flash of green. I found it on page 82. It was a full-page portrait of Archibald Hargrove, Graham's father and the former chairman. He was standing on a construction site, wearing a hard hat and a tailored suit, pointing at a steel beam. The sun was catching his hand. I froze. I pulled my phone out and used the zoom function of the camera to act as a magnifying glass. There was the ring, the square emerald, the heavy gold setting. It was unmistakable, but something was wrong. In the photo, Archibald Hargrove was wearing the ring on his left ring finger. I blinked, checking the image again. I looked at his jacket buttons to ensure the image had not been flipped. It had not. The breast pocket was on the left. Archibald wore the ring on his left hand. My mind raced back to the boardroom. Graham wore the ring on his right hand, and my father. My memory of him was tactile. I remembered sitting on his right side while he read. I remembered holding his right hand while we walked to the park. I remembered the sensation of the cold gold band against my palm when he squeezed my hand. My father wore it on his right hand. It was a discrepancy that most people would dismiss as personal preference or a change in ring size. But in risk analysis, a deviation in pattern is never just a deviation, it is a signal. Archibald wore it on the left. My father and Graham wore it on the right. Why I stared at the photo. Archibald was a large man. His hands were thick, meaty, the hands of a man who enjoyed steak and scotch. Graham was leaner, more ascetic, and my father had been slender. If a ring is sized for a large man's ring finger, it would be too big for a slender man's ring finger. Where would a slender man wear a ring that was too loose? He would move it to his dominant hand, his right hand, where the fingers are usually slightly thicker due to muscle development. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the library's air conditioning. The ring Graham was wearing, the ring my father had worn, had not been resized. It was being worn on the wrong hand because it did not fit the way it was supposed to. It was not a bespoke piece made for them. It was a relic they were trying to hold on to. I turned the page. On page 90, there was a candid shot of Archibald at a gala. He was holding a champagne flute. The lighting was sharp, focused directly on the glass in his hand. The ring was in perfect focus. I held my breath. In this photo, the emerald was pristine. The surface was smooth. There was no crescent moon scratch. The photo was dated 1989. My father disappeared in 1994. The scratch, the mark I had traced 1,000 times as a child, was not there in 1989. That meant the damage happened later, or it meant the mark was not damage at all. I took the highest resolution photo I could with my phone, focusing macro lens tight on the ring in the book. Then I closed the volume, shoved it back on the shelf, and walked out of the building. I did not go to a mall jeweler. I went to Jewelers Row on Sansom Street, to a narrow, dusty shop with bars on the windows and a sign that said Estate Appraisals Horology. The owner was a man named Mr. Solikov, who looked like he had been inhaling gold dust for 50 years. "I am not selling," I said, placing my phone on the velvet counter. "I need you to look at a photo. I need to know about a flaw." Mr. Solikov adjusted his loupe, squinting at my screen. "I cannot grade a stone from a picture, miss." "I don't need a grade. I need you to look at this mark." I zoomed in on the crescent shape I had drawn over the image to explain what I was looking for, then showed him a sketch I had made from memory, the exact curve, the jagged edge. "It looks like a scratch. A crescent moon." He studied my sketch, then looked at the photo of the pristine ring from the book. He hummed, a low vibrating sound in his chest. "You say this mark is on the lower left quadrant?" he asked. "Yes." "It looks like an accident, like someone hit it against a table." "Emerald is a type 3 gemstone," Solikov said, lecturing the air. "It is brittle, yes, it can chip, but a crescent shape, a perfect curve." He shook his head. "That is not a scratch, young lady. That is an obfuscation." "A what?" "A removal," he said. "In the old days, and I mean the old days, families would engrave the table of the stone, not the band, the stone itself, a crest, a monogram. If the ring changed hands illicitly, or through a feud, the new owner would not want the old name visible." My stomach turned over. "So they would polish it off. If they were careful, if they were hasty, or if they wanted to keep the weight of the stone, they would just grind it down, attempt to buff it out. But if the engraving was deep, you would leave a ghost, a depression." He handed my phone back. "You are not looking at a scratch. You are looking at a shadow of a letter." "What letter?" I whispered. "A crescent," he said, tracing the air. "Round back, open front, a C, no, too sharp, a G, maybe, but if you say it has a straight back." He paused, looking at my sketch again. "That is the bottom curve of an E, or maybe an F, where the verticals have been worn away." I grabbed a notepad from the counter. I drew an E, then I erased the top and middle lines, leaving just the curve of the spine and the bottom stroke. It looked like a crescent. Then I drew an F. I erased the straight lines. "What if," I said, my voice trembling, "it was both?" I drew a stylized monogram, an E intertwined with an F. If you took a grinding wheel to the center of it, if you tried to erase the identity, the deepest parts of the curve would remain. E, F, Evelyn Fisher. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the counter. "Are you all right?" Solikov asked. "No," I said. "I am really not. I walked out onto the street, the noise of Philadelphia traffic hitting me like a physical wave. My mother's name was on the ring. It wasn't just a family heirloom my father had. It was hers, or it was connected to her. E.F. It couldn't be a coincidence. The universe was cruel, but it was not that poetic. My mother, the waitress who died with nothing. My mother, who told me not to chase shadows. Don't trust anything that won't stand up and claim its name. My father hadn't been talking about the ring. He had been talking about the theft of the ring, or the theft of the identity behind it. If the ring belonged to the Hargrove dynasty, why did it have my mother's initials hidden in the stone? A terrifying thought bloomed in my mind. The narrative I had lived with for 20 years was that my father was the mystery, the man who left, the man with the secrets. My mother was the victim, the one left behind to pick up the pieces. But what if I had it backward? What if my mother was the center of the story? What if she wasn't just a woman, Evelyn Fisher from Ohio? What if she was Evelyn Fisher of somewhere else? Someone who mattered enough to have her initials carved into a gemstone worth more than our entire house. I went back to the office in a daze. I sat at my desk, staring at the dual monitors, but the supply chain spreadsheets looked like gibberish. Earth to Everly. I looked up. It was Jessica, a paralegal from the corporate counsel's office. She was one of the few people who spoke to me, mostly because we both stayed late and shared a hatred for the vending machine coffee. "You look like you saw a murder," Jessica said, dropping a stack of files on the desk next to mine. "Just a headache," I managed to say. "Merger stress." Jessica rolled her eyes. "Tell me about it. The 42nd floor is in full meltdown mode. I have printed the same non-disclosure agreement 400 times today." She leaned against my cubicle wall, lowering her voice. "And now they are bringing in the heavy hitters. You know Klein and Barrister?" I shook my head. "No. Old money law firm," she whispered. "They handle the estates for all the mainline families, the ones who came over on the Mayflower. They have a meeting with Graham and the board on Tuesday." "Why?" I asked. "Is it for the merger?" "Sort of," Jessica said, checking the hallway to make sure no one was listening. "I heard the general counsel yelling on the phone, something about clearing the lines of succession. Apparently, there's a snag in the trust, an unverified heir." My blood ran cold. "An unverified heir," I repeated. "Yeah," Jessica said, chewing on her thumbnail. "Some loose end from 30 years ago. They have to prove this person either doesn't exist or has no claim before they can sign the deal with the Europeans. Otherwise, the whole stock valuation is fraud." She laughed, a dry, cynical sound. "Imagine that. Some secret kid out there holding up a $10 billion deal and they probably don't even know it." She pushed off the wall. "Anyway, back to the salt mines. Try not to die of boredom." She walked away, leaving me sitting in the hum of the server farm. Some secret kid out there. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. They weren't looking for a stranger. They were looking for me. The Meridian Trust Protocol wasn't just a financial document. It was a containment strategy. The unverified heir wasn't a clerical error. It was a person they had been hoping would stay lost in the foster care system forever. My mother hadn't just been sent money to stay quiet. She had been paid to keep me hidden, and when she sent the money back, she had sealed our fate as outcasts. But why if I was the heir? That meant one of two things. Either my father was a Hargrove who had been disowned, or my mother was. But the ring had her initials. E.F., not E.H. I felt the pieces clicking together, not into a pretty picture, but into a weapon. The scratch was an attempt to erase her. The silence was an attempt to erase me. The merger was the final shovel of dirt on our grave. I stood up. I wasn't going to wait for them to find me. I wasn't going to wait for their lawyers to construct a narrative where I was a fraud or a gold digger. I knew who I was. I was the daughter of the woman whose name was carved into the billionaire's ring, and I was going to make sure that by the time Tuesday came, Graham Hargrove knew exactly who was coming for him. I wasn't an analyst anymore. I was the risk they forgot to calculate. The door to Graham Hargrove's private office clicked shut, and the sound was final. It was the kind of heavy pressurized seal that you find on airlocks or bank vaults. The room was expansive, dominated by a view of the city that made the cars below look like toys, but the atmosphere inside was suffocating. There were no assistants, no secretaries, no witnesses. Graham walked behind his desk, a slab of black marble that looked more like a tombstone than furniture. He did not sit down. He stood with his back to the window, his silhouette cut out against the gray Philadelphia sky. "You said that is your father's ring," Graham said. His voice was not the booming baritone he used in the boardroom. It was low, dangerous, and completely flat. "That is a significant accusation to make against the CEO of this company. It implies theft. It implies a history that does not exist." I stood my ground near the leather guest chairs. My hands were trembling, but I clasped them behind my back so he would not see. I was in the room with the predator now, and I had to be colder than he was. "I did not imply theft, Mr. Hargrove," I said. "I stated ownership, and as for history, we both know history is just a story written by the people who paid for the ink." Graham looked at his right hand. He was still covering the ring with his left, a subconscious guard. "Proof," he said. "You cannot just walk into my office and claim a family heirloom because of a scratch." "It is not a scratch," I said. I stepped forward. I did not ask for permission. I walked until I was 3 feet from his desk. "You wear it on your right hand because it is too big for your ring finger," I said, reciting the deductions I had made in the library. "Your father, Archibald, wore it on his left, but my father wore it on his right, and the mark on the emerald is not a crescent moon. It is a monogram." Graham went still. "I had a jeweler analyze the high-resolution photos from the shareholder archives," I continued, keeping my voice clinical. "The flaw is the remnant of 2 letters that were ground down, E and F, Evelyn Fisher." Graham looked up at me. The color had not returned to his face. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut and was trying to remember how to breathe. "My mother," I said. "And if you put that ring under a spectroscope, you will find the microfractures where someone tried to erase her name." Graham slowly sat down. He slumped. Actually, the corporate armor cracked. He rubbed his temples with his thumb and forefinger. "Evelyn," he whispered. "It was not a question. It was a memory." "You knew her," I said. "I knew of her," Graham corrected. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face with a new intensity. "I was young. My father was a complicated man. There were rumors. There were checks written to accounts that had no names. But I never knew there was a child." He reached for the intercom on his desk. "Don't," I said. "I am not calling security," Graham said. "I am calling Dr. Eris. He is the company's private physician. He is on the 12th floor." "Why?" "Because," Graham said, his voice hardening again, returning to business mode. "Stories are interesting, Miss Fisher, but biology is absolute. You say you are family. I say we prove it, right now, today." "A DNA test," I said. "A swab," he said. "It takes 4 hours with our private lab. We will know by dinner." I calculated the risk. If I refused, I walked out with nothing. If I agreed, I handed him my genetic code. But I had come this far. I wasn't turning back. "I agree," I said, "but I have conditions." Graham raised an eyebrow. "You are in no position to negotiate. I am the only person in this room who knows why that ring has a dead woman's initials on it," I countered. "Here are my terms. 1. I want my own legal counsel present to witness the sample collection. 2. There will be no non-disclosure agreement that binds me in perpetuity. If the test is negative, I leave and never speak of this. If it is positive, we talk." Graham stared at me for 5 seconds. Then he nodded. "Agreed, but I choose the lawyers for the trust." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Get me Klein and Barrister. Tell them to bring the Meridian Protocol." "Yes, the 1995 file." An hour later, the room had transformed into a tribunal. Dr. Eris, a silent man with efficient hands, had come and gone. taking the cheek swabs from both Graham and myself. Now, the air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and fear. 3 lawyers from Klein and Barrister sat on the office sofa. They looked like undertakers who charged by the minute. The lead attorney, a man named Sterling who looked like he had been carved out of granite, placed a thick, sealed document on the coffee table. The cover read, Meridian Trust Protocol, Subsection 4. This document was drafted 29 years ago, Sterling said. His voice was dry, like rustling paper. It was sealed by your father, Graham, and the senior partners of this firm. It was to be opened only in the event of a specific claimant appearing. Me, I said. Sterling looked at me with eyes that held zero warmth. A claimant identifying as the issue of the excommunicated party. The what? I asked. Open it, Graham commanded. He was pacing by the window, agitated. Sterling broke the wax seal. He pulled out a sheaf of papers that were yellowing at the edges. He scanned the first page, his expression unchanging. It appears, Sterling said, that Archibald Hargrove was a man of significant foresight. He anticipated this day. He slid a page across the black marble desk toward me. I looked down. There, in typed courier font, was my name. Beneficiary Everly Fisher, D.O.B. March 12th, 1996. My knees nearly gave out. I sat down in the chair opposite Graham. It was real. I wasn't crazy. My father hadn't just left. He had been planned for. I am in the trust, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You are, Sterling said. However, there is a condition, a poison pill, if you will. Explain, Graham snapped. The trust acknowledges Everly Fisher as a beneficiary with a claim to 15% of the voting stock, Sterling said. But the protocol stipulates that if this claim is activated, it triggers an immediate audit of all Hargrove assets prior to 1994. Graham stopped pacing. So, Sterling continued. The current merger agreement with the Europeans has a clause. Any retroactive audit of the family trust is grounds for immediate termination of the deal. Furthermore, there is a liquidity trigger. If Miss Fisher accepts her shares, the company is required to pay out a cash dividend that exceeds our current reserves. I understood the math instantly. It was beautiful in its cruelty. It is a trap, I said, looking up at Graham. Archibald didn't write this to protect me. He wrote this to ensure that if I ever showed up, I would destroy the company. Sterling nodded slowly. Precisely. If you claim your inheritance, Miss Fisher, you will bankrupt the Hargrove Meridian Group. You will kill the merger. The stock will plummet to zero. 5,000 people will lose their jobs. And every headline in the country will blame the greedy, illegitimate daughter who came out of nowhere to sink the ship. The room went silent. I felt a cold nausea rising in my throat. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. My father, or whoever Archibald was to me, had ensured that I could never be part of the family without destroying it. I didn't know, Graham said. He looked genuinely horrified. Everly, I swear, I knew there was a protocol. I knew there was a backup heir, but I thought it was just leverage. I didn't know he had weaponized you. He wanted to make sure I stayed a ghost, I said bitterly. Or a villain. The phone on the desk buzzed. Graham hit the speaker. Yes. Dr. Eris, sir, the voice crackled. We have the results. Read them, Graham said. He looked at me. We are siblings. Everly, half-siblings. We can fight this. We can contest the will. The probability of relatedness is 99.9%, Dr. Eris said. Graham let out a breath he had been holding. See, we are family. However, Dr. Eris continued, the markers are distinct. The subject, Miss Fisher, shares a paternal lineage with you, Mr. Hargrove, but she is not the daughter of Archibald Hargrove. Graham froze. What? Repeat that, I said, leaning closer to the speaker. She is not Archibald's daughter, the doctor said. She is the daughter of a first-degree male relative of Archibald. But given the genetic drift, no, correction, She is the daughter of Archibald's son. Graham's face went white, whiter than it had been in the boardroom. That is impossible, Graham whispered. I am Archibald's only son. No, Sterling said from the sofa. The lawyer wasn't looking at the papers anymore. He was looking at Graham with a strange, pitying expression. You are the only son who stayed. Graham. Graham looked at the lawyer, then back at me. Julian, he breathed. The name hung in the air like smoke. Who is Julian? I asked. Graham walked over to the window and pressed his forehead against the cold glass. My brother, my half-brother. He was 10 years older than me. He left when I was 12. Father said he was unstable, said he had betrayed the family. We were forbidden to speak his name. He was erased from the company history, removed from the photos. I felt the room spinning. My father wasn't the billionaire. My father wasn't Archibald. My father was the brother who had been kicked out, the brother who had been erased. The ring, I said, my voice shaking. Archibald wore it on his left hand, but Julian was slender. He would have worn it on his right. Graham turned around. Julian stole the ring when he left. It was the only thing he took. Father was furious. He spent years trying to get it back. He didn't steal it, I said, tears pricking my eyes for the first time. He told me it was the family ring. He told me never to trust anything that wouldn't claim its name. I looked at Graham. My father wasn't hiding from the law. He was hiding from you, from this family. And then he disappeared, Graham said, in 1994. The same year this protocol was written, I said. Archibald found him, he found Julian, and he made him disappear. Graham looked at the Meridian Trust protocol on the table. And then he wrote this, to make sure that even if Julian's child survived, she could never come back. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. My father hadn't abandoned me because he didn't love me. He had been neutralized, and this ring that sat on Graham's finger was a war trophy. How did you get the ring? Graham, I asked. If Julian took it, how is it on your hand? Graham looked down at the emerald. My mother gave it to me when I became CEO. She said it had returned to its rightful place. Your mother, I said. Vivian. Yes, I stood up. The risk analysis was complete. The picture was clear. Your mother knows what happened to my father, I said, and she knows exactly who I am. I looked at the lawyers, then at Graham. I am not signing anything. I am not accepting the shares, not yet. What are you going to do? Graham asked. He looked lost, a boy in a man's suit. I am going to meet my grandmother, I said, and I'm going to ask her why she is wearing a crown that belongs to a dead man. The helicopter ride from Philadelphia to the coast of New England took 45 minutes. It was a journey made in total silence. Graham Hargrove sat opposite me, his face turned toward the window, watching the urban sprawl give way to the dark, churning Atlantic Ocean. He looked like a man who was marching toward an execution, but I could not tell if he was the prisoner or the executioner. We landed on a private pad situated on a cliff edge. The wind was whipping off the water, cold and salty, tearing at my clothes the moment I stepped onto the tarmac. Ahead of us stood the Hargrove estate. It was not a house. It was a fortress of gray stone and slate, built to withstand hurricanes and public scrutiny. There were no flower beds, no welcoming porch swings. It was a structure designed to intimidate, a physical manifestation of the phrase, "keep out." She is in the conservatory, Graham said, his voice barely audible over the dying whine of the rotors. She hates the wind. Does she hate the truth too? I asked. Graham looked at me. His eyes were tired. My mother does not believe in truth. Everly. She believes in narrative. There is a difference. We walked through the main doors into a foyer that was the size of a cathedral. The air inside was still and smelled of beeswax and lilies, the scent of a funeral home. A butler took our coats without a word, his face a mask of professional indifference. He did not look at me. To the staff, I was just another suit, another lawyer, another problem to be managed. Vivian Hargrove was waiting for us in a glass-walled room at the back of the house. The conservatory was filled with orchids, hundreds of them, their alien shapes twisting in the humidity. Vivian sat in a high-backed rattan chair, wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and pearls that probably cost more than my entire college education. She was 65, perhaps 70, but she had the kind of preserved beauty that comes from never having to worry about a grocery bill. Her hair was a perfect helmet of silver, and her posture was rigid. She did not stand up. She did not smile. She watched us approach across the tiled floor with the cold calculation of a general surveying a battlefield. "Graham," she said. Her voice was light, airy, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You look tired. I told you that the merger would drain you." "Mother," Graham said, stopping 6 feet from her chair. He gestured to me. "This is Everly Fisher." Vivian turned her gaze to me. It was like being scanned by an X-ray machine. She started at my shoes sensible, scuffed leather and worked her way up to my face. She lingered on my chin, then my eyes. For a microsecond, her mask slipped. I saw a flicker of something sharp, perhaps recognition, perhaps distaste, but it was gone before I could be certain. "Miss Fisher," she said, "please, sit. The tea is Darjeeling." I sat. I did not want tea. I wanted answers, but I knew the rules of this game. If you refuse the hospitality, you show weakness. You show emotion. "Thank you," I said. Graham remained standing. "We have the results, Mother, from the lab, and we have opened the protocol." Vivian poured a cup of tea, her hand perfectly steady. The china clinked softly. "I assumed as much. Sterling called me. He seemed quite distressed. He always was a dramatic man." "She is Julian's daughter," Graham said. He dropped the sentence like a grenade. Vivian did not flinch. She added a slice of lemon to her cup. "Julian," she repeated, tasting the name as if it were a piece of spoiled meat. "I have not heard that name spoken in this house for 29 years. "She is his daughter," Graham repeated, louder this time. "And she is the beneficiary of the trust." Vivian finally looked up. She placed her cup on the saucer with a deliberate click. "She is a biological fact. Graham, that does not make her family. It makes her a liability." She turned to me. "Let us be direct. Miss Fisher, I appreciate directness. You are a risk, a significant reputational risk. You are a loose thread in a tapestry that we have spent decades weaving. If you pull on it, the whole thing unravels. The merger, the stock price, the legacy, all of it." "I am not a thread," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am a person, and my father was a person." "Your father was a tragedy," Vivian said coldly. "He was unstable. He was unfit to lead. My husband did what was necessary to protect the company." "Is that why you erased him?" I asked. "Is that why you erased my mother?" Vivian paused. A small, cruel smile touched her lips. "Ah, Evelyn, I wondered when we would get to her." My heart hammered against my ribs. "You knew her." "Of course I knew her," Vivian said. "She was a secretary in the logistics division, very pretty, very quiet, and very ambitious. She thought that if she secured the son, she secured the fortune. It is a common story. I see it happen every fiscal quarter." "She wasn't ambitious," I said, my hands clenching into fists under the table. "She was kind, and she died with nothing." "Because she was foolish," Vivian snapped. The veneer of politeness cracked. "I sent her a check. Miss Fisher, 29 years ago, it was a cashier's check for $500,000. In 1996, that was a fortune. It was enough to go away, enough to start over, enough to ensure that I never had to see her, or you, again." I felt the air leave my lungs. $500,000. My mother had scrubbed floors until her hands bled. We had eaten expired bread. We had shivered in apartments with no heat. And all that time, she could have been $500,000 richer. "She sent it back," Vivian said. her tone filled with genuine bafflement. "She tore it into 4 pieces and mailed it back to this house. She said she did not want blood money. Can you imagine pride is a luxury for the wealthy? Miss Fisher, your mother tried to afford it, and look where it got her." I stared at the woman in the cashmere sweater. I suddenly understood everything about my mother's life. Her poverty wasn't a failure. It was a rejection. She had chosen to struggle rather than be owned by these people. She had chosen to be poor and free rather than rich and silenced. "She didn't want your money," I said. "She wanted the truth. She wanted her husband." "Her husband was gone," Vivian said. "Julian made his choice. He chose exile." "Where is he?" I asked. "Dead," Vivian said flatly. "He died a long time ago. Miss Fisher, in a car accident in Europe, or perhaps it was South America. It barely matters now. He is gone." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "But you are here, and we have a problem to solve." She opened a leather folder that had been sitting on the table next to the orchids. She slid a document toward me. "This is a settlement agreement," Vivian said. "It is far more generous than the one your mother rejected. $10 million, a property of your choice in London or Zurich, and a monthly stipend for life." She tapped the paper with a manicured fingernail. "In exchange, you renounce the trust. You sign a statement claiming the DNA test was a false positive due to sample contamination. You disappear from the company. You change your name back to whatever it was before you decided to become a problem." "A clean deal," Graham murmured. He was watching his mother with a look of horror. "You have this ready. You just had this ready." "I am always prepared, Graham," Vivian said, not looking at him. "Do we have a deal? Miss Fisher, you can walk out of here and never worry about a bill again. You can live the life your mother should have given you." I looked at the check. $10 million. It was a number that could rewrite reality. It could buy safety. It could buy silence. But I looked at Graham's hand. He was gripping the back of a chair. The ring was there. The emerald with the EEF monogram. "I have a question," I said. Vivian sighed, as if I were a slow child. "Ask it, and then sign." "If my father was in exile," I said, "and if my mother was just a secretary you tried to pay off, why is that ring here?" I pointed to Graham's hand. "Why is the ring with my mother's initials, Evelyn Fisher, sitting on the hand of the CEO of Hargrove Meridian?" The silence that followed was absolute. The wind outside battered the glass, but inside, the air was frozen. Vivian blinked. It was the first time she looked caught off guard. Her gaze darted to the ring, then back to my face. "That ring is a family heirloom," she said. "It belonged to Archibald." "No," I said. "Archibald wore it on his left hand, and before that, it was pristine. This ring has my mother's initials carved into the stone, and then clumsily erased. Why would Archibald Hargrove wear a ring with the initials of a secretary he despised?" Vivian stiffened. She picked up her teacup. But I saw the tremor. It was tiny. But it was there. The china rattled against the saucer. "There are things in this family that we keep," Vivian said, her voice tight, "because they need to be kept. It is a trophy, a reminder of what happens when you cross the line." "A trophy," I repeated. "You kept my mother's ring as a trophy." "It was Julian's ring," Vivian hissed. "He gave it to her. He defaced a priceless Hargrove emerald with the initials of that woman. When he left, when he was removed, we took it back. It belongs to the estate. It belongs to the victor." "Removed," I said, latching onto the word. "You said he left. Now you say he was removed." "It is semantics." Vivian waved a hand dismissively. "Sign the papers. Miss Fisher, take the 10 million. Do not dig in a graveyard. You will not like what you find." I stood up. I pushed the check back across the table. It slid over the polished glass and fell onto the floor. "I don't want your money," I said. "I want my shares. I want my seat at the table, and I want to know exactly how my father was removed." Vivian stood up then. She was tall, imposing. "You are making a mistake. You are a nobody, a foster child from Ohio with a cheap suit and a chip on her shoulder. "If you try to fight me, I will destroy you." She walked around the table, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I will release stories to the press. I will tell them you are a gold digger. I will tell them you seduced my son to get a DNA sample. I will paint you as a mentally unstable stalker who is obsessed with a dead man. By the time I am done, you won't be able to get a job at a gas station, let alone sit on a board of directors." "Enough," Graham said. The word cracked through the room like a whip. Graham stepped between us. He turned his back to his mother, facing me. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the resemblance. We had the same nose, the same stubborn set of the jaw. "She is not signing," Graham said. "Graham," Vivian warned. "Do not be an idiot. Think of the merger." "To hell with the merger," Graham said. He turned to face his mother. "You lied to me. For 30 years. You told me Julian ran away. You told me the ring was a gift from father. You let me wear it. You let me wear a stolen ring." "I protected you," Vivian shouted, losing her composure for the first time. "I built this empire for you. Do you think you would be CEO if Julian were here? You were the second son. Graham, the spare I made you the king." Graham looked at her with profound disgust. He pulled the ring off his finger. He held it up, the emerald catching the gray light. "I never wanted to be a king if it meant standing on my brother's neck," Graham said. He turned to me and held out the ring. "Take it," he said. "Graham, no," Vivian shrieked. She lunged forward, but Graham blocked her path. "Take it, Everly," Graham said. "It is yours. It always was." I reached out. My hand was shaking. I took the heavy gold band. It was warm from his skin. I closed my fingers over it, feeling the sharp edge of the square-cut stone. The crescent moon pressed into my palm. "We are leaving," Graham said. "If you walk out that door with her," Vivian hissed, her face contorted with rage, "I will burn you both. I will activate the board. I will have you removed for incompetence. I will tell the world that you are conspiring to tank the stock." Graham buttoned his jacket. He looked colder than I had ever seen him, but it was a clean cold, the cold of clarity. "Do your best, Mother," Graham said. "But you are forgetting something. I am the CEO, and she is the largest individual shareholder. We don't need your permission to exist anymore." He took my arm. "Let's go, Everly." We walked out of the conservatory, leaving Vivian Hargrove standing among her orchids, screaming into the silence of her empty fortress. The sound followed us down the hall, a high, thin wail of a woman losing control for the first time in her life. As we stepped back out into the wind, I looked down at the ring in my hand. I slipped it onto my thumb. It was loose, but I made a fist, holding it tight. "She will come for us," I said as we walked toward the helicopter. "She will use everything she has." Graham nodded. He helped me into the cabin. "I know. She will try to bury us, just like she buried the others." He looked at me, and a grim smile touched his lips. "But she made a mistake this time." "What mistake?" I asked. "She forgot that you are a risk analyst," Graham said as the rotors began to spin, lifting us away from the cliff. "And she just gave you all the data you need to destroy her." War does not always start with an explosion. Sometimes it starts with a notification on your phone at 6 o'clock in the morning. I woke up to a vibrating nightstand. The screen was lit up with alerts from news apps, Business Insider newsletters, and a dozen messages from numbers I did not recognize. The headline on the Philadelphia Business Journal's digital splash page was not subtle. "Billionaire blackmail junior analyst accuses Hargrove CEO of theft in bizarre power play." I sat up, the cold air of my bedroom doing nothing to cool the heat rising in my face. I tapped the article. It was an exclusive, based on an anonymous source close to the Hargrove family. The source, who sounded suspiciously like a woman with a passion for orchids and reputation management, painted a vivid picture. It described me as a low-level staffer, with a history of financial instability, who had cornered Graham Hargrove with a fabricated story about a family heirloom in an attempt to extort a settlement before the upcoming merger. It did not mention the DNA test. It did not mention Julian Hargrove. It mentioned my mother's brief, unverified employment and my time in the foster system, framing it all as the backstory of a desperate grifter. Vivian had not just declared war, she had launched a preemptive nuclear strike. I showered in 5 minutes, dressed in my sharpest navy suit, and put the heavy gold ring on my thumb, turning the stone inward so it was hidden against my palm. I was not going to hide. If I stayed home, I looked guilty. If I went in, I looked defiant. The lobby of the Hargrove Meridian Tower was usually a place of hushed efficiency. Today, it was a shark tank. When I walked through the revolving doors, the security guards looked at the floor. The receptionist, a woman who usually greeted me with a nod, suddenly found her computer screen fascinating. I walked to the elevators. I could feel the eyes on my back. I could hear the whispers. That's her. The one with the ring story. I heard she asked for $20 million. I stepped into the elevator. 3 people stepped out before the doors closed, unwilling to be in the same confined space as the company cancer. When I reached the 42nd floor, I swiped my badge to enter the analyst pit. The light on the reader turned red. Access denied. I tried again. Red. It won't work. Everly. I turned. It was Marcus, my former mentor. He looked pale and uncomfortable. He was holding a cardboard box. They cut your clearance, he said quietly. You are locked out of the server, the intranet, and the email system. Am I fired? I asked. No, Marcus said, lowering his voice. HR says you are under administrative review. If they fire you, you can sue for wrongful termination and subpoena the records. If you quit, you lose your standing. They want you in limbo. They want you to sit at your desk with no computer and no phone until you break. He handed me the box. It contained my personal mug and a framed photo of my mother. They cleared your desk. You have been moved to Office B4. Office B4 was a storage closet in the basement near the mailroom. It was a humiliating demotion designed to break my spirit. Thanks, Marcus, I said. I took the box and went to the elevator, but I did not go to the basement. I pressed the button for the penthouse. My badge didn't work for the floor, but I knew the override code for the service elevator, a trick I had learned during the fire drill assessments. I walked into Graham's outer office, his executive assistant, a woman named Sarah, who usually protected him like a pit bull, looked at me with wide eyes. You can't be up here, Miss Fisher, she said. Tell him I am here, I said, or I will go downstairs and give an exclusive interview to the reporter currently camped out in the lobby. The door to the inner office opened before she could pick up the phone. Graham stood there. He looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. His tie was loosened, and his sleeves were rolled up. Let her in, he said. I walked inside and he shut the door. The moment we were alone, the exhaustion on his face deepened. I saw the article, he said. Vivian moves fast. She is trying to isolate me, I said. She thinks if she humiliates me enough, I will take the check and run. It is worse than that, Graham said. He walked to his desk, which was covered in stacks of physical paper files that couldn't be deleted remotely. It is not just about you. It is the merger. The board is using the instability caused by your claim to trigger the penalty clauses in the deal. What do you mean? There is a faction on the board, Graham explained, pointing to a highlighted clause in a contract. They have been trying to push me out for 2 years. They want to sell the company for parts, strip the assets, and cash out. But they needed a cause. Vivian gave it to them. They are arguing that the uncertainty of succession you represent lowers the company's value. They are trying to force me to sign the merger deal by Friday at a fire sale price, or they will vote to remove me as CEO for negligence. So if I fight for my birthright, you lose the company, I said. And if I walk away, Vivian wins. We are in a pincer movement, Graham said, but they made a mistake. They think we are enemies. He pulled a file from under a stack of ledgers. I had it run a sweep of the archives before they locked down your access. I found something. What? HR records, Graham said. From 1998 to 2001. My father disappeared in '94, I said. What do records from 4 years later have to do with him? Graham opened the file. Because people don't just vanish. Everly, they have to eat. They have to work. He slid a grainy employee ID photo across the desk. The man in the photo had gray at his temples and a beard, but the eyes were the same. The kindness was there. It was my father. But the name under the photo was not Julian Hargrove. It was not even the name I knew him by in Cleveland. Named Jonathan Thorne. Role Special Project Consultant. Clearance Level 5. He was here, I whispered. He was back here. He was working as a consultant, Graham said, under a fake name, in the logistics division, specifically, on the automated sorting systems. Why? I asked. Why would he come back to the place that erased him? Look at the dates, Graham said. He started in '98. He was terminated in 2001. The exit code is dismissed with prejudice. That was the year my mother got sick, I realized. He didn't leave us because he wanted to. He came back here to get money, to get help. He was working in the shadows of his own company to try and save her. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a blocked number. I looked at Graham. I have to take this, I answered. Hello? Miss Fisher. The voice was elderly, brittle, but sharp as a tack. It sounded like paper being crinkled. You do not know me, but I knew your mother, and I knew Mr. Thorne. Who is this? I asked. My name is Margaret Calloway, the voice said. I was Archibald's executive secretary for 40 years. I typed the letters that ruined your life. I put the phone on speaker so Graham could hear. Why are you calling me now? I asked. Because I am dying, Miss Fisher, Margaret said matter-of-factly. And I do not wish to meet my maker with this much weight in my soul. Vivian thinks she cleaned the house, but she forgot that secretaries are the ones who hold the dustpans. What do you have? Meet me at Rittenhouse Square, she said. The bench near the goat statue. Come alone, or bring the boy. It does not matter. Just bring the ring. Graham and I looked at each other. He grabbed his coat. We found Margaret Calloway sitting on a park bench, feeding pigeons with a terrifying intensity. She was tiny, wrapped in a wool coat that was 3 sizes too big, but her eyes were bright and intelligent. She didn't stand up when we approached. She just looked at Graham. You look like Archibald, but you have Julian's chin. Mrs. Calloway, Graham said respectfully. She turned to me. And you? You are the image of Evelyn. Same stubborn mouth. She reached into her oversized handbag and pulled out a small, heavy envelope. She did not hand it to me immediately. Archibald was a hard man, she said. But he wasn't evil. He was afraid. He was afraid of Julian because Julian had the one thing Archibald didn't. What was that? I asked. A conscience. Margaret said. Julian wanted to change the company. He wanted to stop the dumping of toxic waste in the Jersey wetlands. He wanted to unionize the drivers. Archibald saw it as weakness. He saw it as the end of profits, so he cut him off. She handed me the envelope. When Julian came back in '98, under the name Thorne, he wasn't just looking for money. Margaret said, he was gathering evidence. He was building a case against the board. He was going to expose the environmental crimes that built this empire. What happened, Fa? Graham asked. Why did he stop? They found him, Margaret said. Vivian found him. They threatened to go after you. Everly. They told him they knew where you were in Cleveland. They told him if he didn't disappear for good this time, you would have an accident. I felt cold. Despite the sunlight, my father hadn't abandoned me. He had traded his life for mine. He left something behind, Margaret said. Before he was removed, he gave this to me. He said, if the girl ever comes, give her this, but tell her the ring isn't jewelry. It's a key. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single, silver key. It was old, the kind used for high-security safety deposit boxes at private banks. It had a number stamped on it, 808. The ring is a key, I repeated. I looked at the emerald on my hand. I looked at the silver key. Bank of Philadelphia, Margaret said, standing up with difficulty. Old vault, box 808. You have the key to the box, but the box has a dual mechanism. It needs a physical key and something else. She pointed to the ring. Archibald designed the family vaults. He loved puzzles. The lock requires a specific magnetic signature to disengage the tumblers. The signature is in the setting of that ring. Graham stared at the ring on my hand. That's why Vivian kept it. That's why she wanted it back so badly. It isn't just a trophy. It opens the vault where the bodies are buried. Go, Margaret said, buttoning her coat. The bank closes in an hour, and Vivian's lawyers are probably filing an injunction to freeze the assets as we speak. We ran. We didn't wait for a driver. We ran through the streets of Philadelphia like two fugitives, the billionaire and the outcast. We burst into the main branch of the Bank of Philadelphia 10 minutes before closing. The manager tried to stop us, citing protocol, but Graham's face was on the cover of Forbes. That still carried weight. We were led down into the vault, a room of silent steel and cold air. Box 808 was at eye level. It had a standard keyhole, but above it, there was a strange, square indentation in the steel plate. I inserted the silver key Margaret had given me. It turned, but the door didn't open. A red light blinked on the panel. The second lock, Graham said. I took the ring off my thumb. My hands were shaking. I pressed the square emerald into the indentation. It fit perfectly. It was as if the vault had been built around this stone. I heard a click, then a whir, then the heavy thud of bolts retracting. The door swung open. Inside, there was no money. There were no diamonds. There was a thick stack of documents, bound in twine, and on top of them, a leather notebook. I pulled the notebook out. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was the same handwriting that had annotated the history books in our living room in Cleveland. My dearest Everly. The first page read, "If you are reading this, I failed to get back to you, but I did not fail to protect you. The truth is heavy, but it is the only thing that will set us free." Graham reached into the box and pulled out the legal documents. He scanned the first page, and his eyes went wide. "My God," he whispered. "What is it?" I asked. "It is a patent," Graham said, his voice trembling. "And a deed of ownership." He turned the document so I could see it. System for Automated Logistics and Route Optimization. Inventors, Julian Hargrove, Evelyn Fisher. Date, 1990. "This isn't just evidence of a crime," Graham said, looking at me with awe. "Everly, this is the foundation of the entire company, the algorithm we use, the system that makes us billions. My father didn't invent it. Your parents did. They stole it," I said. The anger that had been simmering in me for years finally boiled over, hot and clarifying. "They didn't just erase us. They built their castle on our bricks." "And this," Graham said, holding up a second document, "is the proof that the transfer of intellectual property was forged. It proves the trust owns the patent." "Which means," I said, realizing the full scope of the weapon we were holding, "that the merger is illegal. You can't sell a company that is built on stolen property." Graham smiled. A sharp, dangerous smile that matched the one I felt forming on my own face. "No," he said, "but we can certainly use it to fire a board of directors." "And Vivian?" I asked. "Vivian," Graham said, closing the box, "is about to find out that some ghosts don't just haunt you. They sue you." We walked out of the bank with the evidence in my bag. The article on my phone was still trending. People were still calling me a fraud. But it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't just a risk analyst. I wasn't just an heir. I was the owner of the truth. And I was about to present the bill. The air inside the bank vault was stagnant, smelling of old paper and dead air. It was a smell that reminded me of the library archives. But this was different. This wasn't history recorded for the public. This was the history they had tried to cremate. We had opened the box. The heavy steel door of safe deposit box number 808 stood ajar. But it wasn't just a box. According to the bank log lying on the metal shelf, this box was leased to a company called Aurora Holdings. I know this name, Graham said, his voice echoing slightly in the small, steel-lined room. Aurora Holdings. It was a shell company. It was dissolved in 1995. My father's finance team used it to write off bad assets. It wasn't for bad assets, I said, pulling the stack of documents onto the small viewing table. It was for buried bodies. I untied the twine binding the folders. My hands were steady now. The adrenaline of the chase had faded into a cold, clinical need to process the data. I was an analyst, and this was the most important data set of my life. I opened the first folder. It wasn't just the patent we had glimpsed earlier. It was the original employment contract for one Evelyn Fisher. I scanned the document. My eyes stopped on the job title. Position Lead Systems Architect. I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. She wasn't a secretary, I whispered. Vivian lied. My mother wasn't a secretary in the logistics division. She was the lead systems architect. Graham leaned over my shoulder, reading the text. That is impossible. In 1990, women weren't given architect roles in this company. My father didn't believe in it. She didn't get the role because of his belief, I said, flipping to the next page. She got it because she wrote the code. I pulled out a series of schematics. They were hand-drawn on graph paper, detailed flowcharts of a routing algorithm that mimicked the flow of water to optimize trucking routes. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was my mother's, the loop of the L, the sharp cross of the T. I had seen this handwriting on grocery lists and excuse notes for school. I never knew it had designed the nervous system of a billion-dollar empire. The Hargrove Optimization Model. Graham read from the header of a document. It is the backbone of our entire logistics network. We still use the core kernel today. It saves us $300 million a year in fuel costs. And here's the transfer, I said, pulling out a document that looked like it had been crumpled and then smoothed out. It was an assignment of intellectual property. It transferred all rights to the code from Evelyn Fisher and Julian Hargrove to the Meridian Group for the sum of $1. There was a signature line for Evelyn Fisher. It was blank. She never signed it, I said. She never sold it. Then how do we own it? Graham asked. You don't, I said. You stole it. I dug deeper into the stack. I found a letter, typed on heavy corporate letterhead, dated October 1994. It was addressed to Julian Hargrove. Dear Julian, the situation regarding Miss Fisher has become untenable. The legal department has prepared a case for corporate espionage. If the proprietary data is not surrendered immediately, we will be forced to file criminal charges against her. However, if you agree to the terms of the separation specifically, your immediate departure from the state, and the dissolution of your claim to the family trust, we will agree to seal the file. We will not prosecute Evelyn. We will allow her to leave with a clean record, provided she never speaks of her work here again. The choice is yours. Her freedom for your exile. Sincerely, Archibald. I dropped the paper. It fluttered to the concrete floor like a dying bird. He didn't leave because he was weak, I said, my voice breaking. He didn't leave because he was bought off. He left because they were holding a gun to my mother's head. Graham picked up the letter. His face was gray. They were going to send her to prison. They framed the creator of the technology as a thief to force her husband to abdicate. And if he stayed, I said, piecing together the timeline, they would have destroyed her. She would have been a felon. I would have been born in a prison nursery. He left to give us a chance at a normal life. And the ring? Graham asked, looking at the emerald I had placed on the table. I looked at the heavy gold band, the trophy Vivian had talked about. Vivian said it was Julian's ring, I said. She said he'd defaced it with her initials, but look at the appraisal report attached here. I pointed to a yellowed slip of paper from 1988. Item the Meridian Signet. Provenance, the junior branch, commissioned for Julian Hargrove upon his graduation. It wasn't Archibald's ring, I realized. It never was. It was Julian's. It was his personal property. When he left, he didn't steal a family heirloom. He took his own ring, the ring he intended to give to my mother, And when they removed him, Graham said, his voice thick with disgust, Vivian took it back. She took it back and wore it, or made me wear it. Why? Why keep it? Because she is a conqueror, I said. In ancient wars, you didn't just kill the enemy king. You took his crown and you melted it down, or you wore it to show everyone that his line was dead. Wearing that ring making you wear that ring, it was her way of saying that Julian was gone, and his legacy now belonged to you. Graham slumped against the wall of the vault. He looked like a man who had just realized his house was built on a sinkhole. Everything, he whispered. The technology. The capital. The legitimacy. It is all stolen. I am not a CEO. I am a fence for stolen goods. You didn't know, I said. Ignorance is not an excuse when you're sitting on the throne, Graham said bitterly. I walked around that office, criticizing people for lack of ethics, while wearing the proof of the biggest crime in the company's history on my finger. I reached into the very back of the box. There was one last thing, a small, white envelope. It was not typed. It was handwritten, to my little Evie. My heart stopped. I recognized the pen. It was the cheap blue ballpoint she used to write checks. I opened it. The date was 1999, 3 years after my father had vanished, 2 years before she died. Evie, if you are reading this, it means they won a round. It means I am gone, and I couldn't tell you the truth myself. I wanted to tell you every day. I wanted to tell you that your father was a hero, not a ghost, but fear is a terrible silencer. I kept a copy of the original contract. Julian managed to hide this box before they forced him out completely. He told me the key was safe. He said, "The truth waits." They think they bought my silence with fear. They think that by making us poor, they made us weak. But they forgot that when you strip everything away from a person, you leave them with nothing to lose. Do not hate your father for leaving. He bought your freedom with his absence. And do not hate yourself for not knowing. I raised you to survive. Evie, I raised you to look at the numbers, because I knew one day you would find the one equation they couldn't balance. The ring is yours. The name is yours. Take it back, not for the money, but because they don't get to write the end of our story. Love, Mom. I folded the letter. I didn't cry. I was past crying. The sadness had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. It was the same resolve that had gotten me through foster care, through college, through the nights of hunger. I looked at Graham. He was watching me, waiting for me to scream, to break down. She wasn't a victim, I said quietly. She was waiting. I picked up the ring. I slid it onto my thumb. It felt heavy, but it didn't feel wrong anymore. It felt like a weapon. What do we do? Graham asked. We have the proof. We can go to the press. We can sue. No, I said. If we sue, it takes 10 years. The lawyers will bury us in motions. Vivian will spin it. She will say the documents are forged. She will say my mother was disgruntled. Then what? We don't fight them in court, I said. We fight them where they live, in the boardroom. I looked at the patent again. This patent proves that the intellectual property behind the merger doesn't belong to the company. It belongs to the trust, specifically to the excommunicated party. You, Graham said. Me, I confirmed. Which means I own the technology they are about to sell to the Europeans. I started to formulate a plan. It was risky. It was dangerous. It required timing that had to be perfect. It was the kind of plan my mother would have engineered. The board meeting is in 2 days, I said. Vivian thinks I am a scared little girl who will take a check and run. She thinks she has won because she controls the narrative. She controls the board, Graham reminded me. She controls the board because they think she holds the assets, I said. But she doesn't. We do. I looked at the stack of papers. Graham, I don't just want to stop the merger. I want to restructure the reality of this family. I am with you, Graham said. Whatever it takes. I am done being her puppet. Good, I said, because we are going to need a forensic accountant, a very brave lawyer, and a way to get me into that meeting without security tackling me. I can handle security, Graham said. But why? Why not just release this online? Because, I said, tapping the letter from my mother. Vivian didn't just steal money, she stole history. She rewrote my father into a villain and my mother into a footnote. I want to look her in the eye when I delete her version of the story. The question isn't where is my father anymore, I said, looking at the steel walls of the vault. The question is, who authorized the erasure? And on Tuesday, we are going to make them answer it. I put the documents into my bag. I felt a strange sense of calm. The mystery was solved. The what was clear. Now came the how. We walked out of the vault, leaving the empty box behind. The ghost of Evelyn Fisher wasn't in the box anymore. She was walking right beside me, and she was ready for war. We set up our command center in a suite at the Four Seasons, paid for in cash by Graham to avoid the digital footprint of the company credit cards. It did not look like a hotel room anymore. It looked like the war room of a coup d'etat. The floor was covered in stacks of paper from the safe deposit box. The walls were taped with flowcharts I had drawn on hotel stationery, mapping the flow of money from the patent my mother wrote to the pockets of the people who erased her. I was not working alone. Graham had used his personal retainer to hire Jonas Vale, a corporate litigator who had been pushed out of a white shoe firm for being too aggressive, and Benji Cohen, a forensic accountant who looked like a teenager but could trace a single dollar through a hurricane. It is a classic wash, Benji said, tapping his laptop screen. He had been working for 16 hours straight, fueled only by room service coffee and spite. Look here, 1995. The revenue from the Hargrove optimization model that's your mother's code was routed into a subsidiary called Aurora Holdings. We knew that, I said, pacing the room. Aurora was the shell company. Right, Benji said, but Aurora didn't just dissolve. Its assets were acquired for pennies on the dollar by a blind trust in the Cayman Islands. That trust then leased the technology back to Hargrove Meridian for an annual licensing fee of $12 million. So the company was paying itself for technology it already owned? Graham asked. He was standing by the window, watching the street below. He looked grim, a man watching his own castle burn. No, Benji corrected. The company was paying the trust, and the trust was paying out dividends to 3 specific accounts. Name them, I said. Account A is Archibald Hargrove, Benji said. Account B is Vivian Hargrove, and Account C. He paused, typing a command to decrypt the beneficiary routing number. Account C is listed as consulting fees to a firm called Vantage Capital. Graham turned around. Vantage Capital. That is Preston Vance's private equity firm. Preston Vance, I repeated. The head of the audit committee. The same man who is pushing for the merger vote on Tuesday, Graham said. His voice was hard. He isn't just an impatient board member. He is a co-conspirator. He has been getting a cut of the stolen patent money for 30 years. Jonas, the lawyer, leaned back in his chair. This changes the strategy. We are not just looking at intellectual property theft. We are looking at racketeering, RICO statutes. If we prove this, the FBI doesn't just fine the company, they seize it. I don't want the company seized, I said. There are 5,000 employees who have nothing to do with this. If the feds raid us, the stock goes to zero, the pension fund evaporates, and innocent people lose their livelihoods. I know what it is like to lose everything because of someone else's greed. I won't do that to them. Then what is the play? Jonas asked. You have a smoking gun, but if you fire it, you sink the ship. We don't sink the ship, I said, looking at the flowchart on the wall. We mutiny. I walked over to the diagram. The merger vote is scheduled for 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. The European buyers are signing based on a valuation that includes the proprietary technology. Correct, Graham said. If the board votes to approve the merger knowing that the technology is stolen, they are committing securities fraud, I explained. It is a felony, jail time, no golden parachutes. So we tell them before the vote, Graham asked. No, I said, a cold smile forming. If we tell them now, they will postpone the meeting, they will bury the evidence, they will pay off the judges, They will spin it as a clerical error. I looked at Graham. We tell them during the meeting. We wait until everyone is seated. We wait until the Europeans are on the video link. We wait until the minutes are being recorded. And then we drop the bomb. A hostile disclosure, Jonas said, nodding appreciatively. If you present the evidence of fraud on the record, in front of witnesses, the board cannot vote yes without incriminating themselves. They will be forced to kill the deal to stay out of prison. And once the deal is dead, I said, we use the panic to force a restructuring. We demand the resignation of Vivian, Preston Vance, and anyone else who touched that money. It was a heist. But we weren't stealing money. We were stealing back the truth. My phone rang. It was a blocked number. I knew who it was. I motioned for the room to be quiet. I put it on speaker. Miss Fisher. Vivian's voice came through. It was smooth, polished, but there was a jagged edge of tension underneath. I trust you are enjoying your little vacation. I am busy, Vivian, I said. I am sure you are, she said. I am calling with a final offer. I have spoken to the trustees. We are willing to increase the settlement. $50 million. Tax-free. Wired to an offshore account of your choice within the hour. $50 million. It was an amount of money that was abstract to me. It was enough to buy a small island. And if I refuse, I asked, then we will release the file we have prepared on you, Vivian said. Her voice dropped an octave. We have statements from your foster families. We have a report about a theft incident when you were 14. We have a psychiatrist's note suggesting you suffer from delusional episodes regarding your father. We will paint you as a mentally unstable woman who seduced my son to extort the family. The press loves a fallen woman. Everly, by Wednesday, you won't be a whistleblower. You will be a joke. My hand tightened around the phone. The theft incident she mentioned was me stealing a loaf of bread and a pack of ham when my mother was too sick to work. I had been caught, and the shop owner had let me go. But Vivian had dug it up. She had weaponized my survival. You are terrified, I said softly. I am pragmatic, Vivian snapped. Take the money. You are out of your depth. Keep your money, Vivian, I said, and you might want to save that file. You are going to need a lot of paper to wipe up the mess you made. I hung up. Graham looked at me. She is going to destroy your reputation. Let her try, I said. Reputation is what people think of you. Character is what you are. I know what I am. We need one more thing, Jonas said. We have the paper trail, but juries and shareholders hate math. They need a voice. We need something that connects the money to the intent. We need to prove they ordered the erasure, not just that they profited from it. As if on cue. Graham's laptop chimed. It is a secure email, Graham said. From Margaret Calloway. He clicked the file. It was an audio attachment. She said she found this in the archives. Graham read. It was on a dictaphone tape labeled Board Minutes, November 1994. He pressed play. The audio was grainy, filled with static, but the voices were distinct. The girl is a problem. Archibald. I froze. It was Preston Vance's voice. He sounded younger, smoother, but the arrogance was identical. She is 9 years old. Preston, came Archibald's heavy, gravelly voice. We cannot touch the child. We don't touch her, Vance's voice replied. We starve the mother. If Evelyn Fisher has no job, no reference, and no patent, she breaks. She will take the check, and if she doesn't, we erase her name from the patent filing. Who is going to believe a secretary wrote the code? It is illegal. Archibald grunted. It is necessary, Vance said. If Julian's name stays on that patent, he controls the voting block. Do you want your son running this company? Archibald, or do you want to run it? There was a long pause on the tape, then the sound of a lighter clicking. Do it, Archibald said. Scrub the name, pay off the clerks, and tell Vivian to handle the ring. I don't want to see it again. The recording ended. The room was silent. Jonas let out a low whistle. That is it, Jonas said. That is conspiracy. That is intent. That is the nail in the coffin. I looked at the laptop. I had just heard the moment my life was decided. I had heard two men in a room trading my mother's dignity for stock options. They hadn't hated her. They hadn't even cared about her. She was just an obstacle in a spreadsheet. "Preston Vance," I said, memorizing the sound of his voice. "He will be at the meeting," Graham said. "He is chairing it." "Good," I said. I stood up and walked to the window. Philadelphia lay spread out before me, a grid of lights. Somewhere out there was the small, cold apartment where my mother died. Somewhere out there was the foster home where I cried myself to sleep. They had used their power to make us invisible. They had used their money to rewrite history. "We are not going to send this tape to the press," I said, turning back to the team. "Not yet." "Why not?" Benji asked. "Because I want Preston Vance to hear it first," I said. "I want to play it for him while he is sitting at the head of the table. I want to watch his face when he realizes that the ghost he tried to starve has come back to eat him alive." I looked at Graham. "Get me a security pass. I don't care how." "I am the CEO," Graham said, a fierce light in his eyes. "I will walk you in myself." "No," I said. "If you walk me in, they will stop us at the door. Vivian will have guards waiting for you. She expects you to bring me." "Then how do you get in?" "I go in as the one thing they never look at," I said. "I go in as the help." I pointed to the catering schedule on the flowchart. "The meeting is catered by a third-party vendor. They bring the coffee and the water at 9:45. "You are going to sneak in as a waitress?" Jonas asked skeptically. "I am not sneaking," I said. "I am infiltrating. I spent 4 years waiting tables to pay for college. I know how to be invisible. And once I'm in the room, once the doors are locked," I touched the ring on my thumb. "I am going to make sure they never forget me again." "Draft the speech," I told Jonas. "No adjectives, no emotional appeals, just the dates, the amounts, and the statutes violated. I want it cold. I want it to sound like an autopsy." "An autopsy of what?" Graham asked. "Of the Hargrove Meridian Group," I said. "As they know it?" The plan was set. We had the evidence. We had the strategy. We had the element of surprise. Tomorrow. I wasn't just Everly Fisher, the risk analyst. I was the risk they never saw coming. The boardroom on the 42nd floor was a theater designed for intimidation. The table was 30 feet of black walnut, polished to a mirror shine. The walls were lined with monitors displaying the live feeds of the European partners in Zurich and London. The air was cold, recycled, and smelled faintly of expensive cologne and fear. I stood by the service station in the corner, holding a silver pot of coffee. My hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and I wore the black uniform of the catering staff. No one looked at me. To the 20 people in this room, the board of directors, the lawyers from Klein and Barrister, and the bankers. I was furniture. I was a delivery system for caffeine, not a person. Preston Vance sat at the head of the table. He was a man who had aged like a shark, all gray skin and dead eyes. Next to him sat Graham, looking pale but resolute, and to his right sat Vivian Hargrove, wearing a white suit that looked like armor. "The motion on the table," Preston Vance said, his voice booming for the microphones, "is the full acquisition of Hargrove Meridian Group by Euro Logistics for the sum of $12.4 billion. This includes all physical assets, real estate holdings, and proprietary intellectual property, specifically the Hargrove optimization model." He looked around the room. "We have reviewed the due diligence. We have secured the regulatory approvals. I move that we proceed to the vote." "Seconded," a board member muttered. "Wait," Graham said. Preston turned his head slowly. "We have discussed this. Graham, the time for debate is over." "The time for debate is over," Graham agreed. "But the time for disclosure is just beginning. Protocol requires that before a vote of this magnitude, the chair must ask if there are any undisclosed material liabilities." "There are none," Preston snapped. "We have been over the books a dozen times." "You missed one," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the silence of the room, it cut through the air like a knife. Every head turned. They looked at the waitress standing by the coffee station. Vivian's eyes widened in genuine shock. She had expected me to be barred by security in the lobby. She had not expected me to be inside the room before the doors were even locked. I placed the coffee pot on the sidebar. I untied the black apron and let it drop to the floor. Underneath, I was wearing my navy suit. I adjusted the collar. I walked toward the table. "Security," Preston barked. "Get this woman out of here." 2 guards started to move from the back of the room. "Sit down," Graham commanded. His voice rang with an authority I had never heard him use before. "I am the CEO of this company, and under Article 5 of the corporate bylaws, I recognize the speaker. She has the floor." The guards hesitated. Looking between Preston and Graham, they chose to stay put. "This is absurd," Vivian hissed. "She is a disgruntled former employee. She is mentally unstable." "I am not an employee," I said, reaching the foot of the table. "And I am not disgruntled. I am a shareholder." I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of documents we had retrieved from the vault. I slid the first one down the long table. It spun across the polished wood and stopped right in front of the video camera broadcasting to the Europeans. "My name is Everly Fisher," I said, my voice steady. "I am the beneficiary of the Meridian Trust Protocol, dated October 14th, 1994, and I am here to inform the board that the intellectual property you are about to sell, the Hargrove optimization model, is stolen goods." "Lies," Preston said, standing up. "Turn off the cameras. Cut the feed." "If you cut the feed," Graham said calmly, "you are committing felony obstruction of a shareholder meeting. The lawyers in Zurich are watching. Preston, they are recording." Preston froze. He sat back down, his face turning a mottled red. "The document in front of you," I continued, addressing the room, "is the original patent filing for the routing algorithm that drives 80% of this company's profit. You will note that the co-author of the code is not Archibald Hargrove. It is Evelyn Fisher, my mother." I slid the second document, and this is the assignment of rights. It is unsigned. The technology was never sold to Hargrove Meridian. It was appropriated after the co-author was threatened with false prosecution and her husband, Julian Hargrove, was forced into exile. "This is ancient history," Vivian said, her voice trembling with rage. "It is a fabrication." "Is it?" I asked. "Then why did the company pay $12 million a year to a shell company in the Cayman Islands for licensing fees on technology it supposedly owned?" I pointed to the flowcharts projected on the screen behind Graham. Benji had managed to hack the presentation remote. The spiderweb of money laundering appeared in high definition. "You weren't just stealing the code," I said to the board. "You were paying yourselves for the privilege. The trust was funneling dividends to 3 accounts: Archibald Hargrove, Vivian Hargrove, and Vantage Capital." I looked at Preston Vance. "That is your firm, isn't it, Preston?" The room erupted. Lawyers were whispering frantically. The faces on the monitors in Zurich looked horrified. "This proves nothing," Preston shouted over the noise. "A few clerical errors from 30 years ago. We will pay a fine. The merger proceeds. The valuation stands." "The valuation is a lie," I said, "and the merger agreement is a trap." I held up the merger contract. I flipped to page 402. "Clause 17, subsection B," I read. "In the event of a title dispute regarding the core IP, the acquisition price is automatically adjusted downward by 60% to cover potential litigation risks." I looked at the board members. "Preston Vance didn't negotiate a good deal for you. He negotiated a fire sale. He knew I was coming. He knew the truth would come out eventually. He engineered this clause so that the moment I stepped forward, the stock price would collapse, and the European buyers, who I suspect have a side deal with Vantage Capital, would pick up this company for pennies on the dollar." I turned to Vivian. "And you let him do it. You were so afraid of the truth about my mother coming out that you were willing to let Preston loot the family empire just to bury the secret for another generation." Vivian sat frozen. She looked small suddenly. The armor of the white suit seemed to deflate. She looked at Preston, betrayal dawning in her eyes. You said the clause was standard protection, she whispered. It is business. Vivian, Preston sneered. He looked at me with pure hatred. You are a very creative girl, Miss Fisher, but you have no proof of intent. You have papers. Papers can be forged. You have no witnesses. Archibald is dead. You have nothing but stories. I have the minutes, I said. I placed the digital recorder on the table. I plugged it into the conference speaker system. November 1994, I said. You were younger then, Preston, but your voice hasn't changed. I pressed play. The sound of the scratching lighter filled the room, then the voice. If Julian's name stays on that patent, he controls the voting block. Do you want your son running this company? Archibald. Or do you want to run it? Do it. Scrub the name. Pay off the clerks. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. Preston Vance looked like a man who had seen his own ghost. He slumped in his chair. He didn't try to speak. There was nothing to say. The general counsel for the company stood up, his face pale. Mr. Vance, the lawyer said, I am advising you to step down from the chair immediately. And I am advising the board that we must suspend the vote pending a federal investigation. No investigation, Graham said. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. We are handling this internally. He looked at me. Miss Fisher has presented irrefutable evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and intellectual property theft. The motion to merge is dead. The motion to remove Preston Vance and Vivian Hargrove from the board for cause is now on the table. I second the motion, a terrified board member shouted from the back. All in favor? Graham asked. Every hand in the room went up, except for two. Vivian Hargrove did not move. She stared straight ahead at the black screen where the European partners had just cut the feed. It is over, I said. I walked to the head of the table. I did not sit in the chair. I stood behind it. I am not here to destroy this company, I said, addressing the stunned room. My mother built the engine that drives it. My father gave up his life to protect it. I will not let it be sold for scrap. I looked at Graham. We had rehearsed this. I have 3 conditions, I said. Name them, the general counsel said. He was writing furiously. 1, I said. I want my shares, 15% of the voting stock, restored from the trust, effective immediately. This makes me the largest individual shareholder alongside the CEO. Agreed, Graham said. 2, I continued. I want a seat on the board. Specifically, the chair of the new Ethics and Audit Committee. I want full access to every ledger, every email, and every transaction from 1994 to the present. If there is another skeleton in this closet, I will find it. Agreed, Graham said. And 3, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. The $12 million in annual licensing fees that was being stolen, that money is now the endowment for the Evelyn Fisher Foundation. It will provide housing, education, and legal aid for youth aging out of the foster care system. No child should have to steal bread, because their parents were erased by people like you. I looked at Vivian. Agreed, Graham said. Motion passed. Security finally moved. They escorted Preston Vance out. He walked like an old man, broken and small. The room cleared out slowly. The lawyers packed their briefcases with shaking hands. The board members hurried to their phones to call their brokers. Finally, it was just the 3 of us, me, Graham, and Vivian. Vivian stood up. She picked up her purse. She walked over to where I was standing. She looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time, there was no hatred in her eyes anymore. Just a strange, cold exhaustion. You have your mother's eyes, Vivian said. I always hated them. They see too much. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. She placed it on the table. I kept the box, she said. Gee. The ring shouldn't be loose. It damages the setting. Why did you keep it? I asked. Really? Vivian looked at the empty boardroom. Because it was the only thing I had left of Julian. I sent him away. I told myself it was for the company. But when I held that ring, I could pretend he was just on a trip. I could pretend I wasn't the monster who ate her own young. She pushed the box toward me. You win. Everly, she said. Her voice cracked, a dry, brittle sound. Not because you have the papers, not because you have the tape. You won because you dared to stand up and claim your name. I spent my whole life hiding behind mine. She turned and walked toward the door. She stopped at the threshold. Take care of the company, she said to Graham. It is all we have. No, Mother, Graham said, putting his hand on my shoulder. It is just a business. We have each other now. Vivian walked out. The heavy doors clicked shut. I looked at Graham. He looked tired, but lighter. The weight of 30 years of lies was gone. Are you okay? He asked. I picked up the velvet box. I took the heavy gold ring off my thumb and placed it inside. It fit perfectly in the groove. I am, I said. For the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am. What now? Graham asked. We have a company to rebuild, a press release to write, a lot of fires to put out. We will get to the numbers, I said. I snapped the box shut. The sound was satisfying. But first, I am going to call my landlord and tell him I am breaking my lease. I think I can afford a better place now. Graham laughed. It was a genuine laugh. I walked to the window. The sun was setting over Philadelphia, turning the gray grid into gold. I touched the reflection of my face in the glass. I wasn't the girl waiting on the porch in Cleveland anymore. I wasn't the shadow in the logistics department. I was Everly Fisher. And I had written my own ending. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a wild ride from the boardroom to the bank vault, and I hope you felt every twist and turn. I want to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening on your commute? At the gym? Or maybe hiding in a break room like Everly used to? Drop your location in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoyed seeing the truth come to light, please subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people. Until next time, remember the truth always leaves a trail.